Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. We've got a really big show for you this week. We're going to talk about everything from the Toyota Mirai to the Tesla Cybertruck. We will also spend your money. In between, we'll talk about some other things like some compact crossovers that our senior editor for all things on the West Coast, James Riswick, has been driving, and road test editor Zach Palmer and I have been driving the Dodge Hornet and the Alfa Romeo Tonale here in Michigan. So with that, welcome aboard, guys. We got a big show. Riswick, how are you?
I'm doing good. Well, despite sounding on the contrary, but I'm sure it's a lot warmer here than it is for you. This is kind of like my second winter in California after being in Oregon for 5 years, and I'm still kind of like lost in time. The idea of the calendar and weather and I still look at like, wait, how is it snowing where you are? It doesn't make any sense. It's lovely outside. So it's yeah. I'm sure you really feel sorry for me.
How much snow do you have on your lawn, Zach?
At this point, it's almost melted, I think, actually. Okay. But I mean, yesterday there was a good covering. Really couldn't see much of the grass. So
yeah,
that's Michigan right now.
It has been a hard fade into winter, no doubt about it. We have not had a stepped down thing. It's been cold. So I hope it's warmer like where it is where James is for most of you who are listening. Who knows? It's November. It's about to be December. So kind of is what it is. So we're going to lead off this week with what we've been driving. This is kind of an interesting one, or we wouldn't be talking about it. This is the Toyota Mirai. This is a fuel cell car. That is not something that comes over the transom every day. Let's put it that way. And we drive some pretty interesting things. So I know you spent a good part of a day a while ago slacking your impressions of trying to charge this thing. I mean, take us through this, James. What was this like?
Okay, so let's see how I can do this without making this entire podcast about this. Okay, so I got a Toyota Mirai. It's really only sold in California. So when I lived in Portland, I'm not getting that car to test it, and you guys live in Michigan, therefore you're not getting that car either. So when I come back to California, I can now test a Toyota Mirai. Furthermore, there is a hydrogen filling station about 5 minutes from my house here in about an hour outside of Los Angeles. Okay, so I will request the Mirai. Let's get this show on the road. Okay, so the Mirai, they're going to drop it off to me, but unfortunately, the local one that I just mentioned, it's not working. Furthermore, the one in Sherman Oaks, about 30 minutes away from me, that's kind of in between me and where the press cars come from, that is not functional yet. So they cannot give me a full tank by the time they get to me. Okay, so we've now delayed this. Delayed the loan to me by 2 days. They fill it up back at closer to them. They then deliver it to me. The stated range, because it's not full, because they had to get it to me, way lower than the stated one that Toyota says for the car. That probably speaks to fuel efficiency of hydrogen. But either way, I now have the car. I still cannot fill up at the local station because it's kaput, but I still have enough range to go bombing around the mountains and then go down to LAX to drop my wife off at the airport, and I'm going about 20 minutes beyond that to Long Beach for the sneak preview of the Acura TLX and Honda Ridgeline. Now, I figure, okay, I'm at LAX. Let's see if there's a filling station to top off the tank. Okay, there is. So I go, just pop around the corner from LAX. No, that one's not working. It's yellow taped. Okay, I'm now going to go to the next one on the 405 corridor, which is like 10 minutes away. This is a dedicated Shell station in Torrance, the same city that is the headquarters of Honda, which made the Clarity, and the former home of Toyota. both the two companies, along with Hyundai, who make hydrogen cars. There's a dedicated Shell station there. I go in, the entire thing's closed. The entire thing. There's four pumps. They're all cordoned off. The lady working there said, she asked me, I'm sorry that this is not working. I asked her, is this happening a lot? She said, well, these things were pretty reliable, but up until like the last couple of years, they started breaking down and we do not have the parts available to fix them. So perhaps this is why all of them were down. I go to yet another one. This time I show up, no car there. The screen appears to be working. Okay, here we go. We finally get to fill up with hydrogen, put the credit card in the machine, and screen doesn't change at all. It's not working. I go into the AM/PM station asking, is there something wrong with that thing? And the lady in there just said, no, that's controlled by another company. We have no idea. Right? So that's strike 4, really, at this point, maybe 5. At this point, I give up, right? So because Long Beach is also the home of where the press cars come from, I ring them up and go, hey, I can get back home. I can furthermore have enough range to get you back to me or back to your home, but I will not be able to drive this car anymore. It'll just be a statue in front of my house. So why do you literally have anything that I could possibly review? Like anything that isn't powered by hydrogen at this point. So they gave me a lovely Lexus that I did an interior review, the LX 600. Pretty nice, very interesting interior to go over. So that was the extent of the hydrogen car experience. What is it like to refuel a hydrogen car? I don't know. I didn't do it. Couldn't. Tried. Didn't. So after I published the article, I actually got an email from a guy who owned the car, who owned a Mirai. And he said, yeah, that's pretty much what my experience was. So, yeah, not great. The other thing is, I don't understand how this makes sense. Because in theory, yes, if you live in an apartment or a condominium or somewhere where you cannot charge an electric car, sure, this is an emissions-free vehicle that you can charge, you can fill up like a gasoline car at the same quickness of a gasoline car as opposed to waiting at a Chili's for 40 minutes to recharge publicly. But the problem is, it's not really emissions-free, because while I can charge my electric car, using solar panels on my roof or using an electricity grid that uses renewable sources, hydrogen, because we don't live on Jupiter or the sun, where most of the hydrogen is in our solar system, has to be split off from something else. Well, that something else is effectively methane, natural gas, which is a fossil fuel. So it's not emissions free at all. Furthermore, you're using a whole bunch of power to split off hydrogen from methane to then put it into a car to turn it into water and energy. That makes no sense at all. I'm sorry, the hydrogen cars, no. Maybe for the purposes of long distance travel or ships or something, or if you can turn there's some scenario where it does, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not good. And also the giant hydrogen tanks really rob it of interior space. Yeah, that's the Toyota Mirai for you.
That's interesting. I kind of wonder, there's a few technologies that OEMs are dealing with right now and embracing with different levels. And you kind of ask yourself, why are they doing this? Hydrogen is one of them. Another head scratcher, I think, right now is GM's folly into robot taxi. I actually meant to say foray, but it came out as folly with cruise automation. Perhaps I was more right the first time. Yeah, and there's a few other things, other examples that come up. Someone maybe throw the BMW grills in there, although I happen to like them. Yeah, man, I wonder why they continue to invest with it. So you couldn't tell me how it was to fill it up, but I mean, is this any different than driving a normal car for the listeners out there?
It feels well. It's interesting because it does feel pretty EV-ish because the electric motor is the thing it's like a series hybrid. It's the thing that accelerates, but you do hear the whirring of the fuel cell. It feels slower than it is. Like Motor Trend clocked it in the 7s, and I'm like, what? I was thinking this is like 9. It runs out of steam. It's definitely not electric in that response. The other thing is, so one benefit is that you get $15,000 worth of hydrogen throughout the course of your 3-year lease or 6-year ownership span, which is that's something. Which I think you're probably fine on the lease, but remember that thing I mentioned about hydrogen coming from natural gas? If you've seen my natural gas bill last year, oh dear God, it's rather high. And as such, like hydrogen prices have exploded. So it ain't, once that 15 grand is gone, it costs you like $150 to like fill up some tiny, like relatively tiny tank. Furthermore, let's just fire more torpedoes into this Titanic. Not that the Lusitania, that would be better. Yeah.
Torpedoed 1915.
Too soon.
Some say
Sorry.
Yeah, 108 years-ish. So I'm curious too, were you at all nervous about driving around with a tank of hydrogen strapped to the back of your car?
No. Well, there's 3 of them. There's 3 of them. There's one next to me. Okay. There's one behind on top of the axle and one front of the axle. They actually, instead of just doing one big unit tank, they actually split them up, which is kind of clever engineering. But no, I mean, normally there's 15 gallons of gasoline you drive around with. So, I mean, that's not good. I mean, that's pretty flammable too.
Yeah, more like 20 gallons if you're driving a large SUV, I mean, and
yeah.
I
mean, I'd rather, everyone like talks about EV fires or whatever, but I mean,
No, I hear you. Straight up, I don't even like keeping gas in my garage currently. I keep just the bare minimum for the snowblower, which I never use anymore. I have electric lawnmowers and, well, the cars with their gallons of flammable gas in them, but that's it. It's, I don't know. Somewhere along the line, it's really interesting. We just became okay with driving around enormous gallons of flammable fluid, and then people are worried about EVs. Like, I don't know. The dissonance is a little bit. It's interesting. Let's put it that way.
I guess there's the idea that these cars are bursting into flames in your garage when you're not at home. I don't know how often that happens with gas cars, and I say that like I literally don't know, and also like the rate of them, like how often it happens. It's just everything with EVs and especially Tesla just gets so over-reported that it creates this false sense of like extremeness for anything. So yeah,
we always get the stray shot of a hydrogen station going up in flames every now and then too. That is a great thing for some fear mongering amongst the other flammable events that can happen. I don't know. I want to say it was last year or something like that. There was just a massive fireball at one of the hydrogen stations in Europe, and I know that story clicked extremely well for us back when it happened, because of course it did. So,
I mean, the Hindenburg disaster would probably be more apropos given our discussion here, but hey. I drove a fuel cell car about over a decade ago. It was a Buick, and I forget which model it was, but it was like the cousin of the Pontiac Torrent. Maybe it was the Pontiac Torrent. GM had some of these like fuel cell prototypes, and again, my recollections at this point are pretty vague. But it was about the same. I didn't have to fill it up, and it was maybe slightly slower than you would expect a gas powered car to be. So yeah, I don't know.
I've been in two of them, both the Hyundai, the Nexo, and then also the BMW iX5 hydrogen here recently. Didn't really get to drive the iX5 recently, but I did go through an entire presentation about why we're doing this, why we're going to continue to really look at hydrogen. And yeah, I mean, to what you said, James, like they have both driven just like an EV, but slower. Which, smooth, quiet and all that, but not exactly invigorating to drive in any way. And it was actually interesting with that BMW. I did not drive it in on the West Coast where all of the hydrogen, I guess the broken hydrogen stations are. I drove it in Greenville, South Carolina. And but BMW's plant down there, they have a hydrogen filling station. One thing that I thought was interesting though was they can only fill at a certain PSI, so they could only fill those cars halfway because they did not have the equipment to fully fill them up. But in normal use cases, they actually use all of their forklifts and everything down there on hydrogen. So there's one reason for it to use for manufacturing.
All right. Well, we don't have a real smooth transition to the Hornet/Tonale discussion, so I'll just throw something random. If you're looking for a good book on the Lusitania, Eric Larson's Dead Wake, really good book. He's written a number of historical books and historical fiction books. So since Riswick digs deep with the random trivia, I'll throw that one on there, and then we can just shift over to the Hornet and the Tonale. I guess I'll go first since the Hornet's a little bit cheaper. I drove this better part of last week, and it felt like a European hot hatch, I thought, because it is. Maybe not a hot hatch, like a mildly spicy hatch, but it's definitely European. You open the door and it says made in Italy on that kind of like, the lower part of the running board, which is kind of interesting considering it says Dodge everywhere else. I thought the steering was a little more direct than perhaps you would get in this feedback, in this segment. There's a little bit more feedback going on. It felt a little bit like a European flair, and I think that could be a good thing. I think Alfa Romeo and also Dodge can offer something up different in this segment, which could be rather mundane, kind of, vanilla, if you will. So I like that about it. It reminded me a lot of, I would say, the Dodge Hornet, of the Dodge Dart, a car that was pretty good, that was interesting, that was different, that was European derived, but it wasn't really quite good enough to make waves, make a wake, if you will, in the segment and grab a bunch of new consumers for Dodge. So that was like the comparison that kept coming back to me as I drove this thing. I drove the all-wheel drive GT Plus, which came in a pretty attractive shade of, I guess, burnt orange would be the way to put it, like the University of Texas, if you're trying to get a visual image. So, I mean, in that sense, it was okay. I like the styling, it kind of looked like a Durango front end on an Alfa Romeo, which was okay. Dislikes, I did not like the infotainment system. Sometimes the screen just didn't work very well, which I found to be a little frustrating. It could be it's very cold here and, I have poor circulation. I don't know. Maybe the blood wasn't quite getting to my fingertips. Circulation's not that bad. Let's put it that way. But it was kind of an up and down experience. Overall, a solid car. It has character. It felt like a Dodge with a bit of a European kind of injection, which isn't me trying to be a cliche here. It kind of felt like a Dodge. I also didn't like the seats either. They had that kind of grippy velour-like feeling, and it just kind of like, you sort of like stuck to them, which is kind of like the idea perhaps in a Charger Scat Pack. But getting in these things with like winter coats on, as we've discussed, it was like 20 degrees here. It wasn't super comfortable. It felt clingy. So that's kind of my mini review on the Hornet. How would you say the Tonale graded out on your end there, Zach?
Yeah, so I had the TI trim, which was the middle version. Unlike the Hornet, where you actually have a powertrain choice between just gas or plug-in hybrid, all of the Tonales are plug-in hybrids. So that was, one of the things I was really looking forward to trying out was this Alpha slash Dodge plug-in hybrid system. It's good. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a great plug-in hybrid though. I do wish that under electric power it was a little bit quicker. And it is effectively rear-wheel drive also when you're under electric power, which is interesting, sort of like the way that Volvo does it, where you're just getting power to one set of wheels, even though it is an all-wheel drive car. But that also makes it a little interesting when the gas engine does kick in. When you throw it into the full D mode for the DNA on the alpha mode selector, it does a nice little burnout from the front tires as the rears try to catch up. It's not as discombobulated as the Volvos sort of used to be in that manner, but it really does seem like it flows to an acceptable degree. Beyond that, though, like I actually had a similar experience with the seats. I wonder if they're almost the same and or really really similar seats that they put in the Alpha and the Dodge. Alpha likes really really tight hugging high bolster seats, and this Tonale also had those. Man, just overall though, I do wish that the interior were just a little bit nicer. I would take the Stelvio over it in that sense, and really just driving the Stelvio in general is more fun than the Tonale is. But from it's sort of weird because the Alpha is not necessarily that big from the outside. But I know that James and I were sort of chatting about this before you logged on, Greg, about the subcompact versus compact segment and where it sort of lies. Like the back seat in that Alpha is really really not that bad when you compare it to the Stelvio. It's almost strange in that Alpha has these two SUVs now with very similar back seat and very similar trunk dimensions. They're obviously not exactly the same, but they're some of the biggest differences, honestly, with those now is just how they drive. Do you want the plug-in hybrid, or do you want the Stelvio, which feels like a much more serious Alpha crossover with a rear-biased all-wheel drive system? So I liked the Tonale, didn't necessarily love it for all of those reasons. It would be tough for me to pick, honestly, between that and the Hornet. I've yet to drive the Hornet, but similar powertrain in that with the plug-in hybrid optional.
Yeah, I've driven the Hornet, and so Dodge. My problem is like the segment that this is in. Dodge says it's a compact SUV and prices it as if it is, and dude, it ain't a compact SUV. It is a subcompact SUV. The back seat, I don't remember. They're different cars. They're probably basically the same, but compared to a Stelvio, I don't know. But in terms of like compact SUVs, your CRVs and even like Mazda CX-5, it is small. You are going to have a hard time fitting. It's like for family SUV. Nope, that is not what this is. I actually have a Mazda CX-30 right now, and the space is very similar. The back seat's probably a little bigger in the Hornet, but the trunk is smaller than the CX-30. So, I'm Mr. Luggage Test guy, and all my bags can kind of barely fit in the CX-30. They did not fit in the Hornet, which is not good. A compact SUV can fit all of my bags in a cooler and other crap from my garage, that I need to stuff in to fill the space. This thing ain't close. This is in the subcompact segment would be one of the worst in terms of cargo space. And the back seat I found very cramped even by subcompact standards. And the price is basically if you get the Turbo Plus, so totally loaded, is basically the same price as a CX-30 Turbo all-wheel drive, yada yada yada, fancy version, which itself is kind of like a shocking number for a teeny tiny car. It's like $37,000. I don't know if I said that. If we're talking like, this is the niche of both cars, is I'm very willing to trade functionality and practicality and family friendliness for something that's good to drive, powerful, and has kind of a European upper echelon, like a higher quality interior. Both of those like fit the bill. That's what they're going for. It's a small niche, but I'd rather have the Mazda in this. And you could also get like a CX-5 or a CX-50 turbo and would have that more space and still would be more enjoyable to drive than the Hornet. So, I mean, they don't have the plug-in hybrid, so that is definitely a thing. And if you want a plug-in hybrid SUV that's fun to drive, then sure, right? Like it's definitely better to drive than a Sportage or a RAV4 Prime, but again, you're sacrificing a lot of space. So just you got to be aware of that. In general, I was not a Hornet fan. It seemed pretty half-baked, as if they just put a Dodge badge on an Alfa Romeo. Wait, that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. So I don't know, but I cannot comment about the Alfa Romeo though.
So you like the CX-30 better than the Hornet. How do you like the CX-30 as considered against the Trax or the Seltos?
Yeah, and I've had a variety of those, and like this CX-30, I said it's $37,000. It's like $9,000 more expensive than the Trax I had. The Trax is tremendous value. They really, they put the money towards things that most people care more about, and also cut back on things they don't care so much about. So there's a lot of hard plastic in the interior, but the interior looks really good, and there's a lot of space. I think for most people, that would count more. Although seriously, can we just pad the armrests just a little bit more, please? The Trax looks great. It looks so good. It points to Chevrolet finally trying to do a cohesive brand in terms of both style as well as driving dynamics. I mean, this thing is great steering, wonderfully composed suspension, really smart transmission as well, which I'll talk a little bit later, which kind of speaks to it being like a sporty. You can see the design cohesiveness or cohesion in terms of the Trax with the new Blazer EV, the new Equinox EV, the existing Blazer. You could also, and then the where they got their inspiration from the Camaro. So for the longest time, you had these halo products of Camaro and Corvette, and they don't trickle down at all to the rest of. Look at the sad lump of the current Equinox, or the Trailblazer, which looks like the engineers came up with something and the marketers said like, okay, let's make this work somehow. There was like, talk about Mazda. Every Mazda drives like a Mazda. And that is true with most brands, but not Chevrolet. They did not leverage the fact that they have the sporty heritage of their two most iconic cars, or the heritage of their truck line. For neither of their core consumer products. Now they're finally getting it. And like with the Trax, it's just so good because it has character. It's great to drive, yet it's also practical. And yeah, speaking to value, it's I don't think you can spend over $30,000 on one. So, back to the point of them cutting back in areas people don't care about, it's slow. Like on paper, it's 0 to 60s in the 9s. It doesn't feel slow though, because there's this little triple, the turbo triple. It's punchy off the line. It's when you just like try to like really gun it and pass someone. Yeah, if you're on a 2-lane road, need to pass a slower car, that's a scenario when you're most likely going to notice the lack of power. But otherwise, around town, just getting up onto the highway speed, it's totally fine, especially considering how generally slow people drive and accelerate. You're just not going to notice it, and it's going to get good fuel economy as a result. The main drawback I see is that it's 4-wheel drive only, or front-wheel drive only. I don't know if that's to create, if it's not possible with the platform, that's hard to believe. I don't know if it's to make the Trailblazer, the Trailblazer reason to exist. But either way, that's the main issue. And by the way, the Buick Envista, everything I just said about the tracks basically applies to that too. I think we've talked about that previously on the podcast. So, I mean, you mentioned I also had the Kia Seltos recently. That's a really impressive car too. Like in terms of great value and providing you lots of space for the money. I used it during a extended weekend back in Portland, and I had the family and had all our stuff, and it was a great size and it was enjoyable to drive. Lovely interior update, great technology. But it was good value, but suddenly like the tracks makes it like not seem that great. So really, really interesting cars. And in general, that subcompact segment, when they first came out, you had like the Honda HR-V and the Jeep Compass, kind of the Crosstrek, maybe the original Chevy Trax. Yuck.
That was a rough car in many respects.
Yeah. And at my previous publication, when we were doing ratings and recommended, we were like, we don't recommend any of these things. They're not good, and they're not like just buy a base compact. Now, the list of things we would recommend is definitely longer than those that we don't. And it's not just that they're good; that's that they're very different. Like they're not just like the same box, or like just like a decontented worse version of a more expensive, bigger version. They all have like unique characters, and they satisfy the needs of different buyers, which is really great. Which gives people a lot of choices, which can be overwhelming, but it's less overwhelming when you can look at them and actually determine that they're different in some way. And I think that's why this is one of the most interesting segments out there, because they are interesting cars. And in the case of some of them, they actually are good value. And I can see you picking a Trax instead of something bigger, because it could be a perfectly cromulent family vehicle if you wanted it to be. I certainly used it as such. So, yeah.
I am really excited to drive the Trax and the Envista. They just haven't landed in my driveway yet through happenstance. So I'm really interested. I think, when I look back at the segment, there's so much character in it right now, as you point out there, James. And it used to be such like a penalty box segment. Things like, remember the Ford EcoSport? That was pretty grim. My favorite EcoSport I've ever seen, though, is I was in Quebec City in the dead of winter, and this guy had it on snow tires with the tire on the back, and it looked pretty awesome, to be honest. It was like kind of lifted, but otherwise I've never enjoyed driving that thing. It was a steaming pile, let's put it that way. And the old Trax, and now you're looking at companies like Kia, like General Motors, that have historically struggled in this specific segment, and they're coming up with cars that we're saying, hey, this is better than a used car. This is even better than some things perhaps that are larger, because this vehicle in this segment might fit your needs better. So it's a very interesting time to be in the small crossover segment, which is something I don't know if I've ever been able to say that at any point in the last decade or so.
It is good to see that there are actual good, like, super cheap options cropping up here, like the Track and the Avista, because like most of the like decent super cheap cars have sort of gone by the wayside. Like you look at like a Ford Focus or a Chevy Cruze, like those things simply don't exist. What are you going to buy at the $21,000 price point that doesn't totally suck? Chevy Trax. It's here and it exists and it has a warranty, and it's not bad. So no. I don't know.
And
it's really cool.
To the point of it being actually enjoyable to drive, there's ceiling above this, but where it is now, they could do an SS, and they wouldn't have to make it nutty, but like they could just put a slightly bigger engine in it and it could be a hoot. Like it could be like, even if you just left it front wheel drive, not unlike the Kona N, it has the chassis that it could absolutely take more power and be like really enjoyable to drive. I genuinely like driving this car around.
And yeah, maybe Chevy should go back to their SS all the things days. That was interesting. And like, it was like 4 small SSs out there, but they were interesting cars.
Well, and if you're making everything with the common DNA, then it's not like out of left field where you have like the front wheel drive Impala SS and the Trailblazer
SS. I will disagree with you on that one. That was not a bad one. Small block V8, 303 horsepower. That was fun for the early 2000s.
Yeah, but I don't think you could have detected a lot of Camaro DNA into that, right?
No, that's fair.
So, like now, I think they have the makings of it being, pretty solid, and that could also possibly apply to their EVs as well. So it's like finally Chevy like woken up to try to actually have a coherent DNA, not just like, here's some cars we sell, they're random, which is very old. Like that's the way cars used to be, but in the last 30 years it's come to like, yeah, we should be a brand that is, when you drive brand X, you know what to expect to some degree.
The other thing is they're getting their styling right. I think styling is always subjective, but the Trax is a good looking crossover. So is the Blazer EV, the Equinox EV. The gas powered versions are a little more, less so, but decent looking vehicles. And I think it's starting to really come through, and that could be a difference. Could be a difference maker for some people that walk into a dealership and like, well, I like how that one looks. That looks cool. So. All right, so that's our review section. We're going to kind of do this in-house a little bit and talk about the Autoblog Technology of the Year Award for 2023. The winner is the Mercedes-Benz Dolby Atmos system. We tested this in October. We had a lot of the staff driving all the different vehicles. It was a great day of testing. Of course, testing happens throughout the year. Some of it is more like we're kind of arguing, trying to figure out what goes on the long list, what makes more of like the short list. What should we even consider? What's eligible? And this one got the most votes. It was fairly close, but it was, we did have a clear-cut winner. I didn't have to do any tiebreakers, as I have in the past for various Autoblog awards, where you do have to do the sort of like the vice president Senate tiebreaker vote. I've had to do that a few times. We won't get into that. So we had a winner here, and I think it obviously was deserved. It was a very rich, immersive experience. We had a lot of good tech this year too. We had the Pilot, the Honda Pilot seat removal, second row seat removal, which is probably the least technological thing we had. We had the BMW 7 Series theater screen, the Super Duty cameras on the Ford Super Duty. And let's see, I'm missing something. What am I missing here, Zach? There's one I'm missing.
We also have the Mustang Remote Rev.
How could I forget that? If that isn't technology gunning your engine from your porch, what is? So I would say it was a very eclectic field this year. Things kind of went into the, none were, I would say, frivolous, but some were more purposeful than others. And that's how we grade this too. There is a wow factor, and some of these technologies fared very well in that. Then there's also is how well does it work? And then the third criteria is, how significant is it? So, as you can imagine, that's sort of how certain things might do very well in one category and not very well in the other. So it was a good day of testing. I think we obviously came up with a good winner and a deserved winner. And I don't know, what do you think about the process, Zach? I guess you kind of like, for those of you at home, you don't realize that Zach has to be the hardest worker on testing day. He has to do everything from, well, I guess I got the bagels, but get everything from lunch to make sure the cars are there and that they're not in trouble. What'd you think of this year's testing?
I think that this one went pretty dang well. We had 5 cars this year, which It was more than the past couple of years. We've only had 3 the past couple of years, which, you know, sort of speaks to a lot of new and interesting tech going into new vehicles. I already know that the 2024 one is going to be just loaded with interesting things that may or may not have just missed the time cutoff for this year's event. And this one, this was really interesting because, you know, I sort of went into the testing day not having like any clear-cut favorite, any one of them that I was like, oh, this is one that is going to win. So it was a bit of a surprise, honestly, like when, after seeing everybody's votes and tallying everything up, you know, which one won. The one that did win was the one that I gave the most votes. Obviously the one that most people gave most votes, but nobody, I think, went into the day thinking, oh, Mercedes-Benz and Dolby Atmos, this is the winner for Tech of the Year. But when you sort of get in it and you understand it and you listen to it and you're like, whoa, other car audio systems don't sound like this. You know, just a lot of the others, they were interesting, but they had their flaws, and we saw that throughout the day. You know, we're obviously chatting to each other after we fill out our score sheets, like, hey, this worked for me, this was not working at all, like this was not as it was billed in the press release, like this is a lot more complicated, or this didn't work how I was expecting it to work. Like an example of that was like the remote rev. I mean, one thing that John pointed out that I think most of us agreed with, like, we're kind of hoping that, you know, you could just hit a button on the remote and just free rev it. So say you hold a button down and, hey, you can rev it all the way to red line, let it go, the revs will fall. Now it just does like a little pre-programmed rev, which is fun and all, but not exactly the way that everybody was hoping that tech might have worked. So yeah, really, really great day of testing, a lot of spirited debate, and a close call at the end. Theater screen was second place for those of you who were wondering. Third place was in fact remote rev, just because it's so much fun making V8 noises from the outside of your car. Fourth place was the Super Duty cameras that just didn't really quite live up to their billing, and last place was the Honda Pilot. So if you want a lot more details, I would definitely recommend going to check out the post that's live on the site and see all of the photos, see a lot of the reasoning for why one tech got more points than another, and why Dolby Atmos is the clear-cut winner, honestly, I think. So yeah, another successful Tech of the Year, I'd say.
In addition to the sandwiches from Troy Deli, shout out, which I thought were very good, I really thought the sound of the Atmos system was just really immersive. I think that's kind of a term that we keep going back to. It was rich. It's a surround sound system that it's almost like having the different instruments and the different pieces of the elements of the music kind of come on as they should in a very rich way. It's silky, to use that kind of cliche. And it's available, you have to do it through Apple Music, and not every single artist and song obviously is capable of this. So there's a little bit of that. But everything from like The Who to Taylor Swift was on there that we could test. I think everybody who would, had their allotted, half hour or so, up to an hour in the car, would spend a lot of time in that Mercedes. It was the GLS with their feet relaxed, listening to the music, having a massage. It was probably the cushiest part of the testing day. But more broadly speaking, I think one of the reasons this tech beat out some of the others is that it could be more applicable. And I think this is sort of where music in cars should be heading. If you actually sit in your whatever car, it's okay. The music is fine. Maybe you have talk radio on. Maybe you're listening to sports. It is what it is. It's how you're getting through your day from point A to point B, and that's fine. Believe me, you don't need this to listen to, the Red Wings Canadians game. You don't need this to listen to sports talk radio or NPR. But if you really want to get into, say, again, you're a big Swiftie or something, this does make your driving experience better. Mercedes hasn't quite specified what they're going to do next with this. But Zach, you wrote the piece and you mentioned that a number of other automakers are interested in sort of working with Dolby and, proliferating this sound, which I think is good for consumers because, yeah, full disclosure, we tested this in the Mercedes GLS. It's an expensive audio system in a Mercedes. Yeah, it better be pretty good, right? I mean, cards on the table, that's how it should be. But it's also sort of the meaning that this could expand and that this could make, frankly, the commute better. I wouldn't say it's going to be, I think you said a Corolla or something in the story, Zach. It's not going to be there. But this type of technology could migrate its way up and down the lineup of Mercedes and other automakers. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I mean, for those familiar with what Dolby Atmos is, maybe you've seen it in home theater and whatnot. And it really did start out as this sort of niche thing, that you have in a movie theater. And it's a very unique setup that requires a lot of these speakers and a lot of money. And it's just a very premium setup. Now you can go buy a Dolby Atmos soundbar for your living room. It costs about $300-$400. And so that's just, how far that this tech has come from like a home theater standpoint in about 10 years, which is pretty neat. So you can spend not all that crazy amount of money and still get the really, really cool programming and software from Dolby to run on your speaker, assuming that you have a TV that can actually run it. You need to have some compatible hardware. But we could see that happen in cars, and that's it's sort of, it's starting at the top. It's starting here with Mercedes-Benz. Lucid is also putting it into the Air and its vehicles. Volvo has talked about it, and also Lotus too. I presume just that whole Geely group is in talks with Atmos to make that happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if we just see it trickling into more and more vehicles, because it's sort of one of those things where you kind of have to hear it to believe it. It's very difficult to describe in words and in audio over a podcast like this. But if you are interested in like listening to it and seeing what it really sounds like a theater. I mean, you can go online and look up theaters that actually have that and listen and watch a movie with Dolby Atmos, and you can just do it in your home too. Obviously, a car is one of like the coolest and best sound stages for it because of the just vast number of speakers that automakers give you. This Maybach had 27. You don't need 27 speakers though to make it work. I mean, you can do it in, quite literally one, if you just have a sound bar. However, more does help. If you have 5, 6, 10 speakers, you're just going to get that even more of a unique and interesting experience, audio wise. So yeah, absolutely. It can go everywhere. You can, I really think that we're going to see it in more and more cars as 2020 plays on and maybe into 2030 as more and more people catch on to it.
All right. So check out our full coverage of technology of the year. It went live Thursday at 6 a.m. We like to do things, I guess, at dawn with our announcements around here. I just think it's a good way to get in people's feeds and on their phones. So check it out. We have a great video. You can see how all these technologies work. Let us know what you think. So that's all up there right now. And if you're skiing this weekend, maybe it's not quite that snowy, or you're looking for something to go back as you're maybe killing time on the weekend, do check out these awards. So let's move on to the other big news of the week. Tesla had a sort of a production announcement on Wednesday, and it's interesting. This is more about the Cybertruck that we're curious to see how and when they're going to achieve critical mass. Now, we're sort of broadcasting before this will be coming, so we're kind of coming to you from the past, but also from the future. But I think it's a good example or a good opportunity to just discuss what's up with the Cybertruck. It feels like a lot of the information has been fairly, driveled out, and a lot of the things we have been seeing have been frankly unfavorable. My take on the Cybertruck is I happen to like how it looks. I don't think I'm in the majority. I think at a high level, the silhouette and the stainless steel It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a throwback, 1980s Tron kind of wedge. I like that. I'm here for that. Sounds a little DeLorean-esque. But that also, I think, brings me to another pretty good parallel, which is the DeLorean, which was very tough to build, very tough for them to make money off of. It was a dog to drive. I've never driven one, but I would really like to. And, they had all sorts of production issues and delivery issues. I'm not saying that's going to be a challenge here, but it has been so far. They have an order bank of about 1 million people who have raised their hand and are interested in the Cybertruck. That's about 4 years of a wait list as far as how they could build this. So where are you guys at on the Cybertruck? Let's start with you there.
There might be 1 million people that have put down $100 deposits on the thing, but also there is no price for it yet. I know that Elon has already said that the prices that they revealed at their big Cybertruck unveiling date are definitely not going to be the prices for it when it comes out, because it's, I mean, what has it been, like 5 years since they've actually revealed the thing? 3, 4. I mean, it's been a long time, and they've missed all of their production targets so far. But I mean, am I entertained to see what they roll out tomorrow? I'm definitely going to be watching. I'm definitely going to be curious to see what they have to say, because I mean, this is supposed to be their big launch event. They're technically delivering some trucks. How production ready those trucks are is anybody's guess. Were they hand built? Were they built on a production line? Who is getting them? Are they all Tesla employees? What exactly does tomorrow even mean in the grand scheme of things? I'm not sure, because I guess we haven't really seen it yet. But we are going to learn a lot more about the truck, I think. It might not be a lot, but we don't really know a lot about the truck to begin with. So I'm at least intrigued to see what kind of information they roll out there. I'm definitely not in your camp, Greg, on the whole looking good part. I don't like anything about the way that this thing looks. And it has not improved since they revealed their initial prototype. I don't think. It just looks even more awkward and weird now. So yeah, I guess that's my short Cybertruck take there.
Where are you at with the Cybertruck, James?
I think it is completely and utterly ridiculous. And some of our favorite and most memorable cars and trucks over time have also been ridiculous. I mean, DeLorean is just one example, but so many of the things that we'll look back fondly is like, oh, remember that thing? That was wild. That was cool. Yeah, but they didn't really sell a lot of those cars because they were ridiculous, and people don't want to drive. Sure, you'll sign up for something that's ridiculous if you own 17 other cars, or you're just like really enamored with it to begin with. But over time, you'll go, oh, there's a reason why 100+ years of vehicle development hasn't resulted in this thing before. So any talk, like you see this Tesla stands talking about how it's beating regular trucks and this and that, and you saw the video of it off-roading and the stands going, wow, look at the incredible off-road performance. We're like, you've never seen literally anything else ever off-road before. Like any sort of talk of it being a serious vehicle that can compete with, that can be a viable alternative to gas trucks, or even a Ford Lightning, or the Rivian. The Rivian is like a Ford Ranger compared to this thing. It is just nonsense. It's just as nonsense as the rest of the truck. So let's just put aside the fact that the build quality on these pre-production things that we've seen is laughably bad. And don't talk to me about pre-production stuff. We see pre-production cars all the time in this job, and I have never seen anything remotely bad as that. And so even just moving beyond that, anything beyond it just being a novelty, I'm going to pay just as much attention to a Cybertruck as I would name some low volume Ferrari, or like a Lotus, or something that will get the headlines amongst enthusiasts, but the regular car buyer will not pay attention to them at all. If anything, it draws attention away from Tesla's other like products that have resonated in great extent with consumers. And if that thing sells to the degree with normal non-Tesla specific enthusiasts as the 3 and the Y have, I'll just eat my shoe. But it's ridiculous. And it will meet the same fate as all the other ridiculous cars throughout time.
I'm curious because, stop me if you've heard this before, because Tesla has made a lot of promises that it has not followed through with in any shape or form. Things like where's the Tesla semi-truck? Where's this Roadster we've been hearing about for years? The Cybertruck seems to be one of the, I would say, like most empty promises that actually seems like it's apparently going to happen at this point. So that's where I'm kind of curious to see how this plays out. Like, they've gotten this far. Are they really going to really screw it up? The build quality that we've been seeing is shocking. We've all driven pre-pro cars. I remember I drove a pre-pro Camaro. This is a long time ago, back when they were launching a generation of it. And I remember the engineers were like apologizing all over. And I was like, I honestly wouldn't have even noticed some of the stuff that you guys are pointing out. Yeah, the dashboard's a little rough, but like you expect that, I mean, I think we probably all saw that story of Franz von Holzhausen, who was a very well-respected Mazda designer, is now a designer at Tesla, took the Cybertruck to a Cars and Coffee in, I believe it was somewhere in the LA area, and it was just roundly criticized. It had this like weird kind of tacky wrap on it. So, I mean, I guess there's a part of me that thinks like, they're not going to really get this that wrong, right? The Model 3, the Model S, the Model Y, while they do have some build quality issues, they're generally pretty well-received cars. Tesla's the #1 EV seller in America for a reason. I guess devil's advocate, like, are they really going to screw this thing up that much? We just keep talking about it because nothing ever really happens. Since they made that announcement, remember when they tried the windows were bulletproof or shatterproof or something, and then they shattered? We've seen the Ram Rev. We've seen the Ram Hybrid / whatever it is. It's like an extended range hybrid generator, although apparently the gas never actually powers the wheels. So call it whatever you like. I guess the original Chevy Volt would be a good comparison. You got the Lightning. You got the Silverado EV. Scout is apparently on the horizon here with its electric range of vehicles. Rivian, I mean, how long is this thing going to take to get here? And like really get here?
But their problems are, so many of these problems are what anybody would have, with any rational person would have foresee happening when you saw the thing. And then also knowing that every single production timeline that Tesla has ever provided has grossly, like, they've been wrong. So those two things, is anybody shocked that we're 4 years out and it hasn't been made yet and they've had production problems? No, of course not. Anybody who is kidding themselves. So and if like this thing is not doing X, Y, Z, it's because they shot themselves in the foot from right at the block, because they designed it. I think they might be a little unfair to the rest of the people not named Elon, but like of course it happened. That it's again ridiculous. So you're gonna have issues with it.
Well, we'll see what transpires, the rest of this week. We'll see. Maybe something will come out. Wouldn't it be hilarious if they pulled the cover off and they're like, okay, those are prototypes. We were just kidding. This is the actual truck. Look at how much normal it is, how more normal it is. I mean, that'd be hilarious, right?
Yeah. It's just a Ranger. It looks like a Ranger with a Model S front end. That's it. Normal truck.
They partnered with Nissan or something to, use the chassis of the midsize truck, and boom, here it is. It just says Tesla on the grill, and we're like, okay.
They went back to their roots, like the original Tesla Roadster using a Lotus, and like, oh, maybe we could use like the the Frontier.
There was no build quality issues with the Lotus, so or the Roadster for that matter. So should we spend some money? Let's do it here. I'll answer my own question. Longtime Mr. Earl writes, who we've previously helped with some car buying advice and spend my money. So thanks for writing in and thanks for listening to the Autoblog podcast. It's been a little over 10,000 miles, but I have the urge to sell my Ford Escape. Here are some reasons why. Slow and boring, heavy depreciation, relatively expensive financing. Okay, yeah, it's a pretty rough recipe right there. I've been contemplating replacing the Escape with either a lease on another Model 3 or an Ioniq 6, or taking a chance on a used BMW i3. This is the extended range edition. What do you guys think about options or any other leasing options for under $500? Some interesting considerations here. I would say there's two very different vehicles, and then kind of a choose your own adventure. So who wants to go first?
Well, I did look up lease prices because this is a bit of a curveball generally for us. I'm not really sure. It's obviously practicality isn't much of a concern given he's going from an Escape and doesn't seem to have a problem going to two small sedans like a Model 3 and an Ioniq 6. But since we're talking about lease prices, you can get the Ioniq 6 Limited, so the totally top of the line one for $411 per month. That's a current deal, and that includes the 7,500 EV lease credit, which is the loophole for leasing electric cars. So you do get that, and an SEL, which I think you'd be fine with, is $312 a month. That's $5,000 due at signing though. Also, just the Ioniq 5 is a little less. It's a little more. Actually, it's a little more. Actually, it's a lot more. Never mind. I'm now talking to myself. The SEL Ioniq 5 is $426 per month. The Ioniq 6 is $312. So that seems like an even better deal. I'm guessing by that it's less in demand. So I really like the Ioniq 6. I really like the tech in there. It's really nice to drive. Goes a long way. I think that seems like it's a pretty good lease deal if you stick with that SEL level. Yeah, I think that seems like a solid choice.
Yeah, so I guess looking at the things that you're complaining about, slow and boring, and heavy depreciation. Slow and boring, I'm not surprised about the Escape. Sounds like you didn't buy the 2-liter turbo, which is only mildly faster than the regular one. But what isn't slow and boring to drive is definitely the Ioniq 6. I like that first pick there. Great range, can definitely get it within the lease price. I think it's vastly more interesting to look at and to be seen in than a Tesla Model 3. I really, really like that for something that you're going to keep for a while. It sounds like you're definitely ready to take the plunge to EV. The i3 Rex would definitely be like a close second, just because it's such an interesting, weird, and quirky car, and they are indeed fun to drive. They have that BMW-ness to them, and you could even get the S, which is even more fun to drive than the regular i3. So, but Ioniq 6 is definitely my first pick at that price point. Considerably better in all of the areas that I think that you were complaining about.
Wow. Okay. I'm not sure if I feel good about going last or wished I had gone first. I will also take the Ioniq 6 from this list. I just drove the car like 2 weeks ago, and I really loved it. I was almost surprised how much I liked it. The sort of teardrop, like 1930s Art Deco design really resonated with me. Nice infotainment. The interior is good for a sedan. I had my 5-year-old in the back seat with his sort of like upright car seat, and he had plenty of room, although it's a car, so it's not super tight. And you do have that roof line coming down, so something to be considered. But if you're considering an i3, I don't think this is going to bother you spatially in any way. I would also look at the Ioniq 5 if you're just frankly looking for a different design aesthetic. You know, do you want kind of like that, again, 1980s look, if you will, which Hyundai like openly tried to pattern that after some of their concepts from, 30, 40 years ago. If you like that, you're going to have to pay a little more looking at just some of these lease prices. That might be worth it to you. But if you could get a good deal, like we're seeing here on these Ioniq 6s, it's a screaming deal. It really is. You get a lot of car. It's an EV. It's very nice.
I'd also note that the current deal right now for, I think, the 6 and the 5 includes a home charger and an installation offer.
That's a deal right there. Walk it off, man.
So, yeah, that's a pretty big. Those things are not cheap. So that's a really good thing. And also, I mentioned the Limited was 411. I'm not sure if that's the one you drove, Greg, but I actually had the SE, so like not quite the base level, but base level features with the big battery. So that's the long range rear wheel drive one. And you obviously are sacrificing some, creature comforts and interior ambiance by going with the one with the black cloth interior, but it was still, it was more like an old, like a Cord EX, really, which might be a little harder when you're spending $45,000 on a car, but you're leasing, so I don't know. Those are just 2 points to be made there. I'd probably go with an SEL personally.
If you were decided not to lease as well, I would be very comfortable recommending either of these as purchases. I think, solid cars. I think you'd be happy with it for more than like a however long 3-year lease or whatever you're doing. So, all right, we've spent some money. We've talked about Tesla. We've given out Tech of the Year, and we've reviewed some cars. I think that's a show. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Thanks for listening, everybody out there. If you enjoy the show, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send us your Spend My Monies. We're starting to run out of them. It's getting toward the end of the year. Maybe you want to spend some money on one of those December to Remember events, and we can help you do that. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.